Good afternoon and welcome back to yet another My Radar live stream for Hurricane Delta. I am meteorologist Mike Linden. I am joined by meteorologist Stefanie Lauber. I told you it was going to be a team effort today, folks, and we are just kind of getting things started. Of course, if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and of course, don't forget to click on that notification bell. That way you always know whenever we drop a new video, or of course, whenever we go live, such as this event. And of course, you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. You can interact with myself and with Stefanie, and of course, with Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. And of course, before we get started, big shout out to the team behind the scenes as well, Matt, Damien, and Fernan. I told you things were going to be rocking and rolling today, and as we head into the afternoon, well, things are now really ramping up. We are looking there at the My Radar app, and that is, of course, Hurricane Delta, the 25th named storm so far this season in the Atlantic. What a season it has been, Stefanie. And for Delta, of course, a Greek alphabet name, only the second time in history that has happened, the first time since 2005. But again, Stefanie, the first time that you are live with us today, following along as this storm has approached the coastline. I mean, it has really been an interesting storm to follow in the sense that, let alone the rapid intensification it undergone to where it is today, to the potential landfall times that have seemingly kind of been all over the place.
Yeah, and something that's been remarkable about this storm has been the path itself. Not only are we seeing somewhat of a copy and paste from a storm we saw not too long ago, about a month ago, but the models have been locking onto this path even before Delta had an official name, and kind of what led to it becoming a PTC, or potential tropical cyclone 26. And just for those who are keeping record out there, we only have to go through two more names in the Greek alphabet here before we tie with that record year 2005. So we are coming along here in terms of named storms, activity in the Atlantic Basin, which of course includes the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. So what a 24 hours it has been, especially with Delta, like you said, with that rapid intensification. Even as it was leading up into the Yucatan, when it passed the landmass there, not really disrupting this storm too much because it still held on as it crossed the tip of the Yucatan there, and quickly ramping up last night especially. We saw that eye come through a couple times, and something that was remarkable with this Category 4 storm when it was over the Yucatan was that it didn't have an obvious eye on satellite, which is very uncommon for these strong put-together storms. So, of course, now we have seen some weakening this morning and into this afternoon, which is great news for folks here along the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, you mentioned what a season it's been so far, what a year it's been so far. For many reasons, even outside of the meteorological world, 2020 has been an insane year, to say the least. What a start to the decade, right? And of course, hurricane season officially ends on November 30th. So I know, especially for the folks that live along the Gulf Coast, I'm sure you are ready for this to be over, but we're just not there yet, and you can really see that here. So let's take a look at the My Radar app, and what we have turned on are the radar layer, the wind layer, as well as the hurricane tracking layer. And that's one of the best things about this app that, of course, you know, Stefanie and I have, not only we work for the company, but we are users of the app as well. It's so great to be able to not only have the weather in your hand, but to customize it to see exactly what you want to see. So let's take a look here at the map, and we can see the path there from the NHC. And Stefanie, like you mentioned, a near carbon copy to Hurricane Laura, of course, making landfall as a Category 4 not too long ago in almost the exact same location near Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Oh, it's eerie, and we're so thankful that with this, the intensity's on a downward trend versus Laura, where the storm was intensifying just about up until landfall. And something you can notice in the app is if you have our per station feature, one disadvantage for forecasters and for folks who are trying to follow along with the storm is that the radar has still not been rebuilt in Lake Charles. So we don't have as close of a data point there for on-the-ground observations with that radar being gone. We do have one not too far away that does a pretty good job of showing the wind motions with the storm and those bands coming on through. And of course, with the My Radar app, we have global data, global radar data that helps fill in some of those gaps But definitely a key tool that the National Hurricane Center is looking at is some radar data. So not having that radar, because Laura took it out, has been a big disadvantage for folks along the Gulf Coast. So it has been pretty problematic there. Something that is interesting, we don't like to really compare storms, but in this case it's hard not to because of how similar they've been, and the fact that it's been just about a month since Laura went through, is that the radar data itself shows that we got some more rain creeping into Texas. Of course, this path is just a little bit further west than Laura was. We're talking miles here, but we're getting more rainfall affecting folks across the border into Texas, which with Laura, we saw a stark contrast where a lot of those rain bands evaporated before they really made it into that part of the coastline there. So a little bit more impact for folks here along the Gulf Coast. And something else that's interesting about this storm, Delta, is its sheer size. Now, for the nerds out there, first law of thermodynamics, energy is not created or destroyed here. So as we've seen, the weakening of this storm, that energy's got to go somewhere. So this storm becoming more expansive as we see the intensity go down. And if you look at it, really kind of takes up a good half of the Gulf of Mexico. So folks all along the coastal bend of Texas going out to probably the Florida Panhandle, really starting to see some of the effects with the swells in the Gulf of Mexico there. And as these bands wrap on, things are going to continue to deteriorate going into this afternoon, leading up into landfall.
You know, buoys out in the Gulf of Mexico, according to the National Weather Service, have already reached, with the wave height there, upwards of near 35 feet. So it's churning out there, most definitely. And as you touched on with Hurricane Laura, Stefanie, that was intensifying right up to, like, literally, you and Leslie were both on the air as it was, like, you were wondering whether or not it was going to be a Category 5, being that it was right there and it was just climbing that hill, eventually falling just short of that. But it's a great point that you brought up with the radar site in Lake Charles being totally out there. And again, that is a feature in the Pro Pack that is available within the My Radar app. But Stefanie, let's take a look here at the infrared imagery. You know, before we go to the weather graphics, let's actually take a live look out at the Louisiana area. We have 2 cameras available to us thanks to our partners from WeatherStem. We have, again, those 2 cameras. Let's go to the first one here in, I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly. Things get interesting in Louisiana with the French pronunciations. Is it Ouachita Christian School at Ouachita County, Louisiana? Stefanie, would you say? O-U-A-C-H-I-T-A?
I'm not sure. My guess would be on Ouachita.
Okay.
That might just be the twister in me.
Well, it wouldn't be the South if you didn't have a football goalpost in the shot there. You know, Southerners, they love football, and it doesn't really look like anyone's out there today here on the football field. A bit of a gloomy look over central and northern Louisiana there. Next, let's switch to East Baton Rouge. This one is overlooking Alex Bach Stadium on the campus of LSU. That's where the Tigers play their baseball there in the foreground. And also not exactly a pretty day for baseball, with a bit of a gloomy sky there as those rain bands move in. But of course, if we switch to the weather graphics, we can see on the tropical infrared imagery that it is very likely going to get a little more active sooner rather than later here. You can really see, as Stefanie touched on, the sheer size of Delta as it works its way inland, and it really kind of has begun that north-northeast kind of nudge that Leslie was talking about last night. That for folks that were living along the eastern coastline of Texas, you were probably thinking and looking at this NHC forecast going, what in the world is going on? It's right there. It's coming right for us. But you can really see kind of the sheer power of Mother Nature on such a massive scale here as this system begins to kind of spin the steering wheel in the other direction a little bit. And you can get a really good look at that here on the water vapor imagery, where you have this big trough of drier air coming in from the west. And as this thing begins to nudge itself north and northeast, just off screen here to the east is a ridge of high pressure, kind of keeping that steering flow going there. But Stefanie, with this dry air mass coming in from the west over Texas, we also have shear, of course, that could very well be at play, kind of limiting the top end potential of Delta. That's, I guess, the silver lining here. Delta kind of has a couple of things going against it right up and into landfall.
looking at the top third of the storm and the upper atmosphere and what it's doing. So that orange there being a band of dry air, kind of helping you figure out where part of that trough is, and the white, of course, being the clouds, the colorful part being very moist clouds. So something we saw last night going into the wee hours of the morning was that we had shear, as Mike said, that actually kind of helped in that intensification last night. You get some exhaust. So these things being heat engines, they absorb that warm, moist water, latent heat takes hold, and it just blossoms and bubbles over. Convection takes place. But in the upper atmosphere, that's the tailpipe, and we start getting this exhaust. So that shear was doing a favor to kind of blow that out of the way and create this healthy in, healthy out for the storm, and that really played a role in the intensification we saw. But now we've seen weakening. We're going over a couple of cooler water temperatures there we'll touch on here in a moment, but in the upper atmosphere, that drier air in the mid-levels is a problem as that begins to get roped into that counterclockwise circulation. That becomes part of a problem, but we like to look at this water vapor. It's a really good way to kind of see, in a general sense, what the motion of the upper atmosphere is. So that band of dry air being a really good way to see where the trough is that's going to be steering this storm off and eventually making that curve out to the northeast here. And like Mike said, the high pressure that's to the east of it, around the right-hand side of your screen there, really helping to keep things on that western side of the Gulf of Mexico and zero this thing on where the border of Texas and Louisiana meet. And even here on our infrared imagery, those bright colors showing you where the convection is, those new thunderstorms that are bubbling up like a pot of boiling water. And so we're not done here. The storm's still hanging on. These are massive systems, so it really takes quite a bit of time for them to begin to break down and fall apart. And like I said, they start expanding outwards. And I think just that the latest advisory, tropical storm force winds went out as far as 150 miles. That's my estimate from memory. So it's pretty impressive to see just how big these things are. And in terms of storm size, small storms aren't necessarily weaker. Large storms aren't necessarily more intense. Size doesn't play that big of a role. What it means, though, is that wider range of impacts, more people that tend to kind of feel this storm as it approaches and comes in towards the land. So it really does a number there to show what's been going on. And something else that you were talking about earlier today, Mike, is the quadrants and the kind of overall shape of the storm. So something we've noticed here going on into the later morning, early afternoon, is that we're starting to get somewhat of a tilt, asymmetry in the storm. It's not that perfect circular motion that you see in really healthy storms. So that's also indicative of weakening. That's good news for folks along the coastline here. The storm's starting to really take a beating here, and I don't want to give too much hope. It's still a very strong storm, sitting currently at a Category 2 with 110 mile per hour maximum sustained winds. This is still a formidable storm, especially because folks here just got one not too long ago. But definitely good news and a silver lining, I'll call it, to see things begin to really lose that hold on intensity.
Right. So, of course, no longer a Category 3, taking that step down to 110 miles per hour. And that looks to, at least as of right now, be where it will be making landfall, or at least how it will be making landfall, potentially as a Cat 2, not in that major hurricane range. But that's kind of been how 2020's been so far. It's been the top end of the category, just below, where you're thinking maybe we'll cross that threshold, but maybe not. And Stefanie, as you brought up, these things, they're heat engines. They want to be like a pot of boiling water, and at its simplest, I mean, these things, that being tropical cyclones, they want to, I don't have to tell you this, you know this, they want to be over warm water, right? And as they are not anymore, that weakening will really, really speed up here. So if it's losing steam over water, I mean, taking that kind of top end off of things, as you mentioned, a huge silver lining for the people that have just been, let's just say it like it is, battered this season with Sally, Laura, and now with a Greek alphabet storm. Wild. and that being Hurricane Delta. I should say before we move on to the next graphic, get involved with us. Drop something in the chat. You could be watching anywhere, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And if you leave a question, I've got them all up right here. We'll take some time at the end to kind of go over anything in case you guys want to ask us any questions. But we've got the usual suspects in on YouTube. Of course, Sandy Rose, repping the My Radar fan club. We love it. Otherwise, Stefanie, let's jump back in here. We'll take a look at the questions here at the end because, again, as you mentioned, a Category 2 storm down to 110 miles per hour. It's hustling, only 80 miles now off of the coastline of Cameron, Louisiana. Earlier this morning, it was about 160. So it's really starting to move now as it works its way closer to the coastline. Expected to keep that Category 2 intensity all the way through landfall, which is likely to occur from some point here over the next couple of hours, Stefanie, upwards of just to the short of 8 o'clock there. And of course, Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson will be in, along with Stefanie, to take you the rest of the way forward as this storm heads north and east. Now let's take a wider look here, dropping to tropical storm intensity into Saturday morning by the time it reaches northern Louisiana, eventually continuing to weaken to a depression and eventually dissipating as it works its way, or at least losing its tropical characteristics as it works its way through northern Mississippi, western Tennessee, and into the Tennessee and Ohio River valleys. Now, of course, with an event like this, as Stefanie touched on, the sheer size of these things, particularly this storm, it is very large, and it's for that reason that we're looking at a big chunk of the coastline under watches and warnings. But I don't know how you feel about this, Stefanie, but I always kind of err on the side of caution where for people looking at a map like this, where they're, getting caught up in, I'm right here on the line where the red turns to purple. It's just not a good way of thinking. I mean, this isn't really that much coastline south and west of Port Arthur and into Galveston, Texas. And even though the core of the storm doesn't look to be coming your way, Galveston, you should still certainly have already undergone your preparations because we are looking at the storm surge threat that is really going to be kind of the story from this storm. And Stefanie, it kind of was as well, right, from Laura. And it looks to be that an even wider swath of I keep saying Carolina, the Louisiana coastline. In fact, all of the coastline is under a tropical storm warning. There's a couple of inland spots there that are storm surge watches, but all in all, if you live along the coastline of Louisiana, you are under a storm surge warning, and that just barely extends into Texas. Does not include Galveston, but nonetheless, you're still looking at some very rough surf as well as the rain coming your way. So we'll take a look at this, and then Stefanie will talk about the quadrants as you brought up here. But with the potential inundation, I mean, just look at the coastline of Louisiana. Pretty much everywhere you're seeing there has a good 1 foot of inundation from the storm surge. And as we work our way west toward Morgan City and away from New Orleans, you start to see that number jump up to more concerning levels, 3 to 6 feet, 6 to 9 feet, and anywhere where you're seeing red right here just to the south of Lake Arthur, 9 to near potentially 11 feet, if not higher locally from this event. And then if we go off and look toward Texas, again, Galveston and even south of it is looking likely that you could be looking at some storm surge inundation. And I also should add, Alabama and Biloxi, Mississippi also could be looking at some storm surge as this thing surges inland. So, Stefanie, let me pull the radar back up here, and let's talk about the quadrants of the storm.
I do want to touch on this with the storm surge for folks.
Let me go back to it.
Again, we don't like to really compare storms with Laura, but in this case we're almost forced to because it's so recent and so similar. But something that's different with Delta that I'd like to point out and remind folks of course, at this point we're in crunch time. There isn't really much more you can do to prepare, but folks on the outer periphery, like Mike said, into Galveston Bay, Galveston's a barrier island there in Texas, and they've got those big berms built up there along the beaches, and then going out towards nearing Mobile, of course, through Biloxi, Gulf Shores, and all that. Though you are on that lower end expectancy for storm surge, something that's different about Delta is its size, and with that threat of storm surge becomes so much more of an issue than what it would have been with Laura, just basically on that size, because we have think of it this way. I always like to compare storm surge to, you've been in the pool with friends and you go to splash somebody. you got bigger hands. Adults splash a lot more than kids do. They always win that battle there. So when it comes to storm surge, think of it that way. We have this larger storm, so it's going to do more to churn up the seas, more folks to see these impacts. So that 1 foot, remind you, above ground level, 1 foot above where the sea normally meets the shore is where we're going to see those impacts, and they are further reaching down towards the coastline of Galveston Bay, a bit south of that on the island, and then out east as we head towards the Louisiana-Mississippi border from Gulf Shores and nearing Biloxi and such. So please keep that in mind, and I think that's a pretty good segue into what we're talking about with the quadrants, because everybody knows about the dirty quadrant. Of course, that's that front right, what typically tends to be the northeast quadrant, but this is a pretty asymmetric storm, so that all depends on where the storm's going. In this case, starting to make that northeast motion, and so that dirty quadrant being there on the heel of the boot of Louisiana, that's where we expect to see the most intense impacts from the storm in terms of winds, storm surge, especially that motion that it pushes the Gulf of Mexico onto land. These are counterclockwise spinning storms, so that's really why they tend to take the brunt of that, going into the sole of the boot, going anywhere from New Orleans and Grand Isle all the way back towards parts of Cameron and near Lake Charles. And even though they're inland, remember, this coastline is pretty delicate, wetlands.
Right.
So normally when you, for instance, for us here in Florida, when we get these storms, much of Florida is surrounded by barrier islands. Galveston's another example. They've got that barrier island out there before the coastline proper. And so with Louisiana, we tend to have more vulnerability and less resiliency because of the type of land that's out there, and because it's mostly wetlands. Much easier for the water to go on through, and we saw a lot of inundation with Laura. I think, don't quote me on this, again, going off memory, I believe the peak of the storm surge there was 17 feet. It might have been a little more, but that number's coming off the top of my head there. And went in, I'd say maybe it was a mile with the ocean coming in there. So definitely something to keep in mind for folks here. Storm surge is a very underrated impact with these tropical systems, and definitely don't want to ignore that. But if you're in the dirty quadrant there, you can expect to see the worst of it.
And the important part to overlook as well, that people might think that the most fatalities from weather occur in a tornado or occur directly from ice. It's inland flooding. I mean, by a mile, it is the flooding that kills the most people. So do not take the storm surge threat lightly, nor take the rain threat lightly over these next 72 hours as this thing works its way northward. And, keep in mind, Laura just happened, right? I mean, it's not like once this storm is gone, you can go out into your yard, pick up a couple of sticks and call it a day. I mean, we're talking catastrophic damage. I mean, Hurricane Michael, a Category 5 in the panhandle of Florida, I mean, they're still well into the recovery process, and that occurred in 2018. So we still, it's unfortunate that it's just been, the repeat upon repeat storm paths here, but that's just the way that this year has gone. But that's why the preparations are so important. Let's take a look at the sea surface temperatures, Stefanie, because, we've talked about how these storms want to be over warm water. Of course, the warmest body of water that we're typically going to find around the continental United States is typically right here in the Gulf of Mexico, where it has been record hot for the past several years, year on year on year. Of course, that warm water, extreme warm water, leading to that explosive growth we saw out of Laura and Sally, but a slightly different story here due to Sally and Laura, right?
Well, and really with this, a good marker for tropical systems, they like 82-degree water or higher. That's their strong suit. That's dessert right there. They love it. And here we're seeing some 70s, and that may not seem like a big difference, but that helps. Also, we're in October. We're not in September or even August, where we get more of that solar help to heat up the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, anybody who lives along the Gulf Coast knows that's bathwater there, and part of the reason why people love to visit the Gulf Coast beaches and all that. But some silver linings here in that we've got cooler water temperatures as we head into fall. Again, we've had some storms move through here, and I've got to say, we dealt with Cristobal. We had Hannah.
Oh gosh, that feels like a million years ago. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it really does. I remember the beginning of the season. Here we are dealing with storm number 3. So Cristobal, Hannah, Laura, Marco, Sally,
Isaias.
Beta, Isaias. That was affecting folks along the eastern coastline, and now we're up to Delta. So if I left one out, feel free to drop it in the chat there, but I think that's the bulk of it there. That's now 7 storms just in the Gulf Coast, and it's been incredibly just active. Folks here haven't been able to really catch a break. We've had every month some kind of strongly impactful storm rolling on into folks, especially along the Gulf Coast. And something people pointed out was that Florida really hasn't had much action here for the tropical season. Knock on wood, not that we're looking for anything, but typically, statistically, because of the landmass, how it sticks out like a sore thumb, it tends to see more tropical activity, more landfalls, and we just haven't seen that this season. So it just goes to show you can't always follow the rule of thumb when it comes to what to expect with tropics. I saw, a lot of folks in the Panhandle with Sally were judging off of what they went through with Ivan. They said, well, I did this for Ivan, so I may not do this for Sally, or I will do this because I remember that from Ivan. So again, that's why we don't like to go back and every storm is unique. But again, it is very difficult to try to break away from the mindset of Laura when it was just about a month ago, and now we're dealing with Delta following an eerily similar path with just a few but important differences for folks here. Generally, this storm hopefully will have a better outcome for folks there in the fact that it is slightly less intense and coming in at a bit of a different angle here as you're showing with the track. So it'll be interesting to see. Another good thing is the speed. It's moving pretty quickly, so hopefully this won't be a problem for folks for too long.
Right. It's not slowing down, giving it more time to kind of flex before it makes its final approach there. One thing I will say, and as you touched on, where all these storms are unique, they might look similar, but they really are like snowflakes, right? Each one is so different. The preparations might be the same for people, but in terms of the actual characteristics of the storm, Mother Nature's not so much into repeating things. She likes to keep it interesting. And with this particular storm, and really this particular season, I mean, kudos to the meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center that have absolutely nailed these paths from really far out, going back to Laura and Sally as well as now Delta. They really have been on a razor's edge with almost nailing the center line each time, let alone the margin for error with the cone. So the Navy SEALs of tropical meteorology are just absolutely doing great. So shout out to the men and women down in Miami putting in the long hours. So here's a look at the HRRR model. And I'm sure you've heard Stefanie, Leslie, and myself talk many times about all the different models that are available to us. And essentially what they are looking at all kind of the same thing, really, but they all look at things just a little bit differently to give us kind of different outcomes, really. And if you're looking at just one of them and that's what you're going by, you are doing yourself a major disservice. It would be like writing a book report, or writing a research report, only having read one book or one article instead of all of these others that are available to you to form a more complete picture. We're going to look at this particular model right now simply because of the way that it operates. This is a model that does not go out very far, 16 hours, right, Stefanie? I believe 16 or 18.
It's about, I believe it's 24, I think we get to. Might not be the whole 24, but it's a shorter range model because it's a higher resolution. And if I'm not mistaken, this is a convection allowing one, which is why you'll see more of those details where we see those little pockets of yellow and orange being specific thunderstorms that it's modeling out. So this is a good one. You'll see it a lot when we just have our fast forecasts and do our modeling ahead of time. You get less time out, but you get a better picture, and that's why people like to look at this one a lot, because it's a crisp view. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is a 3-kilometer model. It might be. But
the HRRR, 3 kilometers, but for all of you that are trying to figure out the kilometers, that's distance, what's going on? When we talk about high and low resolution models, the smaller that number, the higher the resolution is, because The smaller that number means the smaller chunks of land that these supercomputers are looking at, as opposed to a model that might be 25 to 100 kilometers that's looking at a landmass in 25 to 100 kilometer chunks. This is 3 kilometers, which, I mean, you can run 3 kilometers. So it's looking at a hyper local level. So a high resolution rapid refresh model, that is the name of the HUR. Let's take a look. Let's put it in motion here. And again, the NHC totally nailing this forecast. Remember that cone is not necessarily showing you the where the storm is going to a degree. It's trying to show where the center is going, right? This black line, we just show this to kind of show you the middle of the cone, but those 2 blue lines, that's the margin of error that the NHC is giving themselves. And maybe one day we'll be able to tell you exactly where a storm is going, but for right now, with all the technology we have available to us, this is what it is. And again, the folks there have been totally nailing this. I mean, maybe just a little bit to the east, Stefanie, with the eye there than where the center line is, but it kind of still all falls in the cone. But look at the time here, 9:30 at night. And at this point, of course, the sun is down. Hopefully there are not people driving around on the road at this point and really taking things seriously, let alone the storm surge, but of course the rain that will likely persist through the evening hours and all the way and likely into Saturday afternoon and evening before parts of Louisiana start to dry up. Look at this again, 1:30 in the morning on Saturday, and still looking at those bands coming inland over New Orleans. Could again see some potential tornado development from those storms as they come in off the coastline. And then Stefanie, here's a look at the 72-hour rainfall forecast, and this is a number that continues to go up from the Weather Prediction Center here, especially that tongue of moisture stretching right over top of Louisiana, really from south to north and right on into western Mississippi there. I mean, 5 to 10, if not 11 to near 12 inches of rain in 3 days, plus the storm surge potentially upwards of 11 feet for people on the coastline. That's a lot of water, to say the very least. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall. That's like 2 of me on top of one another, coming from the Gulf and coming from the sky over a 3-day period. But nonetheless, this is something that people need to really be looking at, even away from Louisiana into northern Mississippi and into Tennessee and Kentucky. A lot of rain over a short period of time.
Yeah, and that's part of the benefit of why this storm has a silver lining to it, and that it's going to be moving quickly, so it doesn't have the opportunity to drop so much rain in the same place. But if you look at that, 5 to 10 inches of rain, that's in addition to what they've gotten so far today. And even last night, the earlier kind of bands, the fringe of the storm, if you will, starting to impact folks here on the Gulf Coast early this morning. So it's another 5 to 10 inches going on into the next 3 days. Benefit being that this storm quickly dissipating into a tropical depression and then losing its tropical characteristics by the time it starts nearing Tennessee. So with it, still going to get these tropical downpours for folks here extending into parts of Arkansas, Mississippi, and even approaching Tennessee and parts of Missouri. It's going to be a pretty soggy one for folks here. But something that was interesting with the HRRR you showed, and of course it's not set in stone, it's a model, it's guidance to give us an idea, but it usually does a pretty good job of general scenario that's going to be playing out here. And it's got a pretty thick band going through New Orleans, the toe of the boot, and nearing the panhandle of Mississippi and Alabama, getting some of those heavy rainfall totals that we just showed you as these bands wrap around. So even after we get to landfall, that's the first half of the marathon here, is getting to landfall. And then once the storm starts moving inland, we still have that counterclockwise rotation, we still have bands moving in, and it really becomes more of an issue for folks on the east side of the storm because it'll be taking that northeasterly path. But folks in Texas still going to be getting the rain going into at least tomorrow, and then we'll see those rainfall totals kind of drop off and really focus along where the center ends up traversing on that path that we showed you going into parts of the Tennessee Valley and all that. But a lot of rain to come with this and a lot of wind. Something else that you mentioned, Mike, is as we begin to see these bands rope in, they hit land and we get friction. So we get the possibility of tornadoes. Probably going to see some of that going on into today, later on tonight, as we head on into the next couple of hours. And there you can see it, those darker shades of gray, robust reds and oranges, showing you we still have thunderstorms bubbling up here over the water. So, I believe this storm is moving at 13 miles per hour, might have been, roundabout.
Let's look at the My Radar app. Fernand, if you want to pull that up for us, let's take a look at it here.
Get the latest
data. This thing is
data
moving
here.
at 14 miles per hour.
Oh, off by 1. And still, it is fast for tropical systems, but if you've ever driven through a school zone, you know how excruciatingly slow that is. So once this thing nears land,
this is massive though,
Yeah, this is like
it's all relative.
Trying to move a jumbo jet, or like when they take the space shuttle to the launch pad. It takes a while. So that 14 mile an hour, once we start getting into those poor conditions along the coastline, folks, it's gonna feel like a while until we get this storm going on through, which is why we've got a couple hours until landfall, even though it's so close to the coastline already. We just have this big storm that's going to be coming on through. So
if only Mother Nature
tonight,
I was going to say, if only Mother Nature could scrub landfall like they scrub launches all the time, right? If only.
Yeah.
Stefanie, let's take a look at some of these questions. We've had a bunch of them here before we say goodbye. Again, shout out to everybody asking us questions, and we really encourage you to get involved with us. Even after this live chat is over, if you ask us a question, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, we will try our best to answer them even through the course of a busy day like today. So let me take a look at some of these questions we've got here. We've got, of course, Sandy Rose watching. She says hello to everybody, and says hello to you too as well, Stefanie. We've got Judy on Facebook asking how Biloxi, Mississippi will fare. We kind of went over that a little bit, Judy. But even though the core of this storm is well to the west of you, just with the way that they naturally rotate, that being counterclockwise, even into Biloxi, you could be looking at some minor storm surge as well as the rain continuing through the evening hours. See what else we've got here. We definitely have some people chiming in that of course that Lake Charles radar is down. That's something I completely overlooked this morning. That's a great point, and that definitely is going to make things, I would imagine, a little more just difficult to deal with, especially for emergency crews on the ground. And big shout out to regional and local EMA officials. Let's see what else we've got here. It feels like forever.
Leslie and I were on air tracking in the My Radar app, and all of a sudden that next scan came through, and we were waiting for it. 132 mile per hour winds being picked up on our graphics, and then it just cut. Radar just shredded apart, and all it takes is one big gust. So
yeah,
incredible.
I mean that was wild, especially since the timing was right there at landfall, right? So Stefanie, we've got we've got Sandy Rose chiming in saying that I love these people. There's no false hype. They are real. We love that. We're trying to keep it real always. So I think that'll probably do it, considering we're getting so close to landfall. Of course, Stefanie, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Chief Digital Meteorologist Leslie Hudson will be in to lead the way through landfall. The ladies are taking you the rest of the way forward, much like how they did for Laura. And it looks like it is going to be here within the next couple of hours that the 25th named storm of the season, still insane to say that, is likely to make landfall here along the Gulf Coast of the United States within the next couple of hours. But again, Stefanie and Leslie will be there to lead you through the rest of the way forward. Before we go, of course, if you do live along the southern coastline of the Gulf Coast there, please, if you are trying to make any kind of decisions, lean on local and regional emergency management officials. Stefanie, Leslie, myself, we can only do so much for such a huge scale, but for boots on the ground, for the small municipalities and towns, rely on your local officials to give you the latest as to what you should do in case of an emergency. And of course, be sure, if you haven't already, to make sure all of your devices are charged. If you have a mobile power bank, I keep talking about those. I highly suggest having one of those. You can keep charged. If you are to lose power, you can still charge your phone to reach the police or fire department or emergency management, or of course be able to track the storms along with us on the My Radar app. So be sure everything's charged, ready to rock. Stefanie, anything else that I forgot that you'd like to mention before we say goodbye?
Well, just thanks to all the folks for joining us. And remember, we'll be back with another update, but you can always track along in the My Radar app we have the storm information there. You can see what's going on with these bands and watch as they move onshore, so you can track along with us. And until then, we'll be in with another update here shortly.
That's a great point. Thank you so much again, Stefanie. And for everybody watching, stay safe and stay dry. We'll catch you in the next one. Okay, nice job. So, Stefanie, did that work out? Like, you were able to see the graphics and everything well?
Yep, because I with Fern.